Hi, everyone. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director at Friends of the Everglades. Thank you for joining us today for a very important Friends of the Everglades Live. We're going to be talking about the right to clean and healthy waters in Florida. We have some great informed guests here to speak with you today. But before I get to that, I want to welcome our audience. Our audience has been growing on our live streams, and we've noticed many thousands of you watching these discussions on replay. I want to thank you for sticking with us. Our goal at Friends of the Everglades is to help people understand what can be really complex issues related to protecting the Everglades, of course, and also our waterways, and translate it into tangible terms and ways that you can take action. So that's definitely going to be part of the conversation today. This topic is something you can take direct action on. So Florida's right to clean water would give a constitutional right to clean water in Florida. You all know we have many other constitutional rights in this country, like the right to free speech. Those rights aren't unmitigated rights. There are limits on them. And I think you're going to hear today about this concept and why it makes sense. Friends of the Everglades is a supporter. And again, how you can weigh in and help this concept and this right be embraced in Florida. I just want to offer a few more introductory comments before I introduce our guests, because it's important to know that this topic is top of mind because our policymakers, our elected leaders, have not fulfilled their duty to protect clean water in Florida. And that's why we're talking about making this a constitutional right. That's why we see perennial algae blooms on Lake Okeechobee, as we do this year and we see every single year. That's why we see polluted water discharged to the northern estuaries, which we're going to talk about with our guests today. That's why we see persistently high phosphorus levels in the Everglades, and also ailing conditions in the Florida Springs and Florida Keys. Water is just so central to our future in Florida, our economy, our well-being. And it's really important that when policymakers fall short, we as citizens step up and demand a solution. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Without further ado, I want to introduce our guest to you. First, we have Joe Benacia. Joe is the chair of the Florida Rights of Nature Network. He is one of the driving forces behind the right to clean water in Florida. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me here today, Eve.
Absolutely. Next, we have Matt DePaulis. He is policy director at the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Eve. Great to be here.
Captain Cody Pierce is the Calusa waterkeeper and also a former professional fishing guide who has lived his whole life along the Caloosahatchee watershed, so has a lot of great firsthand knowledge. Welcome, Cody.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here.
Good to see you. And last but not least, Gil Smart, my colleague here at Friends of the Everglades. He is policy director for Friends of the Everglades. And because that doesn't keep him busy enough, he has a second job as executive director of Vote Water. Welcome, Gil.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Joe to give us just a few minute overview of what the Right to Clean and Healthy Waters initiative is in Florida. Joe, tell us about what this is and why it's necessary here, and we'll cue up your slides now.
Sure. I think it would be helpful if we do go to the ballot summary, because this is what people will read if we successfully qualify for the ballot for 2026. Keep in mind that ballot summaries have to do a very good job of telling everybody what the entire amendment is about. So the amendment creates an enforceable fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. This authorizes a person to sue for equitable relief when the state executive agency, by action or inaction, allows harm or threat of harm to Florida waters. This amendment provides for strict judicial scrutiny of such action or inaction, adds to available remedies, identifies affected constitutional provisions, provides for enforcement, defines terms, and requires attorneys' fees and costs prevailing plaintiffs. So, in short, it creates its fundamental right. There are different levels of rights. Fundamental rights are the highest ones they are, such as right to free speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, and such. We need this level of rights because it offers the highest level of protections. Because as you noted, Eve, the system has not been working. Through its actions, such as issuing permits to build in wetlands or to allow pollution, or through its inactions, not enforcing current water quality standards, not enforcing BMAPs. The system has allowed way too much pollution of our waters. With this amendment, we can hold the state executive branch accountable. We can take them to court, and the court, after it looks at the scientific information, not influenced by special interests, based on scientific information, given the particulars of each case, it could compel the state agencies to do what they're supposed to be doing, what they know they should be doing, in order to clean up and protect and restore our waters. So why is this necessary here in Florida? Well, you noted some of the facts initially. I'll just add a couple more, because a lot of people, I think, don't really appreciate just how critical condition our waters are. We've got nearly 1 million acres of estuaries and 9,000 miles in rivers and streams that are contaminated with fecal bacteria. I believe it was last year that Vote Water noted that our seagrass beds are on the brink of a death spiral. No state has more acres of polluted lake water than does Florida. No state has lost more acres of wetlands than has Florida. The system isn't working. And when citizens have acted at the local level to clean up our waters, we've been stopped. Classic example, back in 2020, Orange County citizens, tired of polluted waters, impatient with a system that hasn't done what it's supposed to do, they took matters into their own legal hands. They amended their Orange County charter. They gave themselves a right to clean and healthy water, and they gave all their waters most basic of rights to exist, to flow, to be free of pollution. 89% of those voters passed that overwhelmingly, no matter what their political persuasion, whatever, everybody was for it. Our legislature very quickly stepped in, and they took those rights away by preempting the authority of local governments to pass laws giving rights to nature, or giving citizens any rights to any aspect of the natural world in Florida. It was that preemption that really forced our hand. The legislature is not going to let us work on water quality at the local government level. We've got to go over their heads and amend the law of the land, which is the Constitution. That preemption, by the way, also showed just how fearful they must be of how effective an environmental rights-based approach to environmental protection can be, or else they would not have taken that dramatic step. So at its essence, and if we can go to the next slide, there we go. In the full amendment, first big paragraph is about the purpose. It says clean and healthy waters promote important public interests, including health, prosperity, and quality of life. I think we all get this, but the paragraph goes on to list some of these. If we can go to the next one. Clean water, obviously. Next one, please. Scenic beauty and recreational activities. It's why we're down here. We love to be out in nature, looking at the beauty that Florida nature provides us. We love being out on the water, in it, fishing it. Next slide, please. Fishing and harvesting. It's a $15 billion industry in Florida. It's part of the way of life here. Next slide, please. We love our wildlife, and we want thriving populations and diverse communities of native fish and wildlife. And kudos, by the way, to John Moran, who took these fabulous pictures that we're seeing. Go ahead. Aquatic ecosystem services, including water filtration and risk mitigation for drought and floods. We're talking about our wetlands that are so obviously critical to us. Next one. And of course, economic interest and business opportunities. Florida's tourist industry runs on clean water. Polluted water cripples it. Next slide, please. The purpose of this amendment is to advance these public interests by creating this enforceable fundamental right. Next slide. Okay, and so this is some legal language, and I urge everyone to go onto our website and read the full amendment. But this is what the essence of the amendment says. Given how important waters are to just about everything here in Florida, if our state agencies are going to harm our waters, pollute them, they must have a compelling state interest, something somehow more important than what cleaner waters mean to so many different aspects of life down here. And if they do have such a compelling interest, then they must make sure that they minimize the harm as much as possible. Only as much harm as is necessary to meet that compelling interest, and then no more. If they cannot do that, well, then our courts, like I said, looking at the scientific information about what is best to do, can compel the agencies to do it. Agencies must comply. They do not have the discretion to ignore the state constitution. And this is how we get them to do what we're supposed to be doing. We have lots of good laws in Florida about water quality. Many of them are not enforced. So I think we're good with the slides now. I think what I would want to add is that just about the initiative, it takes 900,000 signed and validated petitions to qualify for the 2026 ballot. On top of that, we would have to go through a Supreme Court review. The court looks at the language, it makes sure everything is lawful, and then gets put on the ballot. We're confident once we're on the ballot, Floridians are going to pass this. They have a history of doing that. And recently, the amendment language went through some revision to protect it even further from legislative attack, because the legislature is going to try to undermine this, and also to make sure it survives that Supreme Court review. So that's the amendment in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you for mentioning Orange County. I think that's such a great both success story and cautionary tale about the topic at hand. When that was on the ballot in Orange County in 2020, it passed overwhelmingly, and yet the state legislature undermined the ability of the local government to protect the rights of nature in that community. So that's why we need a statewide initiative, and I'm excited to talk to some of our other guests about why they're supportive of it. So I want to turn first to Matt. Matt, why is Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation backing this initiative? How could it make a difference in terms of your work to protect clean water?
Yeah, Eve, this initiative is very important to Sanibel, to Captiva, to coastal environments all over South Florida. We need something like this to be another tool in the toolbox. As Joe said, we have great laws on the books already that are there to protect our water quality, but the problem is they're not being utilized effectively to actually enforce the cleanliness that we would expect from our water. We are in a situation where we absolutely rely on clean water in Southwest Florida and Southeast Florida and all of our coastal environments. We need our clean environments to bolster the economy that runs on that clean water. And what we're seeing now is just a lack of action on the part of decision makers to make meaningful changes to the health of our waterways. We hear a lot about work being done. We hear a lot about innovation that's coming down the pipeline. We hear a lot about dollars being spent in the pursuit of cleaning our water. But what we don't hear about is deliverables. We don't hear about actual meaningful efforts that have been made successfully to get the nutrient pollution out of our waterways, to stop these harmful algal blooms, to make those lake releases less damaging when they hit our estuaries. So anything we can do to hold people accountable for the decisions that they already should be making is something we absolutely support at SCCF.
Thanks so much, Matt. Gil, similar question for you. Speaking on behalf of Vote Water, why are you not only supportive of this amendment, but also on the advisory board for the initiative? And you and I spend a lot of time tracking the ongoings of the state legislature, and I hope you'll say a few words about why that has been inadequate to address clean water in recent years, despite some rather euphemistically named bills like the Clean Waterways Act, for example.
Right. Well, I would add to what Matt just said, which is it's not just that our legislature is failing, to protect our water. It's that we're seeing bills out of our legislature that could actually make things worse. Unfortunately, our legislature is captured by special interests, polluters chief among them. And so what Vote Water likes about this amendment is, to use Joe's term, it goes above our legislators' heads. It's sort of an end run around them. Now, but, at the same time, when this amendment is passed, there's going to need to be sort of legislative, remedies in terms of getting us from here to there. We're still going to need legislators, maybe more than ever, who are committed to the cause of clean water, and more so than they are to their campaign contributors, who will not try to undermine this. I mean, I fully expect there to be some sort of legislative attempt to undermine this. I know we're going to talk about this later. But I fully expect to see our existing legislature, which does not have a commitment to clean water, try to undo this, or try to, go against the word or the spirit of the law, that sort of thing. We continue, Vote Water is sort of dedicated to the political process. We believe we need better policy and policy makers. But that will continue to be the case even after this is passed, because we need to make sure that we have a legislature that values clean water as much as they do campaign cash from special interests. Tracking the legislature, trying to get good bills passed, trying to stop the many bad bills from going through, as you just alluded to, Eve, it's a Herculean task. It's never ending. This might ultimately provide some a respite from that. If we have a right to clean water, there's going to be a lot of bills, I would hope, that we won't see introduced, that we currently are seeing introduced, that could make things worse. So this, I think, could be a real sort of shot in the arm for Florida for a lot of reasons, as everyone else has alluded to. Water is the key to our economy in Florida. It's the key to our quality of life in Florida. It's the key to our real estate market in Florida. It's the key to a lot of different things, and it ought to be protected. It's not being protected now, so we need to go a few steps further, and I think this amendment does that.
Thanks, Gil. I think that's such a great point, that this could prevent bad bills from being filed in the future, like a bulwark, if you will. And we really need that right now in Tallahassee. Let me jump in right here and just say, if you're tuned in live, you can post questions in the comments, both on Facebook and on YouTube. We will see those, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 15 minutes or so of our discussion. You can also post questions on Instagram and Twitter, and we'll try to get to some of those as well. So, Cody, let me turn to you. Speaking from your experience, both as the Calusa waterkeeper now and as a former fishing guide and someone who also does the commercial fishing industry, I'm wondering how you think this will resonate with people. We've been talking about this initiative, Florida's Right to Clean Water, for several years. What's the feedback you're getting? What kinds of folks like this idea?
Yeah, well, thank you, Eve. I'd like to start with, just a statement on my behalf that, I believe that the right to clean water is a wholesome, organic, best shot approach we have to solicit real change and accountability for the environmental movement for the benefit of all of the communities that are here, in addition to the flora and fauna. I really hope that this resonates with all who call Florida home, and not just those that, are in the know as of now. So, the more that we advocate for this and we are collecting petitions for the right to clean water, we are having real world conversations with people of all different demographics. The same consistent subject that comes up over and over again is that these people really do care. One of the most beautiful aspects of the right to clean water is that we do transcend all social stature here in the state. This amendment really does apply to every demographic. And that's something that, as we educate these people, we are seeing a positive acceptance of this, and therefore they wish to push the knowledge further and try to help recruit other people to join this movement. So I think that we still have a road ahead, because we are a community that has, a lot of diversity to it. So therefore, we have more of a responsibility to converse with these people, bring them up to date, and let them know that they do have a voice in this. This is a really good movement for us, and we can really see some change out of it.
Thanks, Cody. There is a very high bar to getting amendments on the ballot in Florida, unfortunately, and that wasn't always the case. The Florida legislature set the bar higher within the last decade to require more signatures to be gathered. So it's a big hurdle, but we actually have seen this year, 2024, there will be a couple of constitutional amendments on the ballot. It can be done. And I think once it gets there, to Cody's point, we're going to see people from diverse backgrounds really supportive. Okay, so speaking of the 2024 effort, Joe, I've been getting some questions from people who are a little confused about where the amendment stands. You guys had a big push to get it on the 2024 ballot. Again, because that bar is so high, you weren't able to gather the 900,000 signatures, certified signatures that are required, petitions rather. So, tell us about why you didn't quite get there in 2024 and why you're more optimistic about 2026.
Okay, well, it is a Herculean task. So in 2024, we started, in 2022, Earth Day, we launched with nothing. Over the course of the next 20 months or so, we gathered a little bit over 100,000 verified petitions. So that's a long way from 900,000. But after sitting down with, professionals in the campaign industry, they actually thought that was absolutely extraordinary for a purely grassroots volunteer operation with not a heck of a lot of money. The two amendment initiatives you noted, they had millions of dollars. All the other initiatives, none of them came close to us. But I don't want people thinking that it's going to be such a far reach. Over the last 2 years, we have also gathered the support of over 200 organizations and businesses and even some local governments. We have had a significant amount of public awareness, as Gil said the other night on a different call, just about anybody involved with water in the state knows about this amendment. We've got an infrastructure now of hundreds of seasoned volunteers, and we have an advisory board as well. So we are feeling very good about going forward over here. We've got a lot of momentum. What's going to have to happen? More specifically, our ambassadors have to triple their productivity. We're looking for them to collect about 300,000 petitions or more this time around. I'm confident that we'll be able to do this. We're already off to a very vigorous start. Our supporting organizations quite clearly are going to have to do what Friends of the Everglades is doing right now and helping to get our word out over here. I think this event today is going to produce a ton of petitions, and we are going to have to raise money. That is going to be a very significant difference between the two campaigns. We are not looking right now to go down the path of paid petition gathering. That is the most expensive way to go. Professionals have advised us to go with targeted mail campaigns. We get a lot more bang for our buck. We already have a pilot program going in Lee County. So we are optimistic, and that's what's going to happen in the next 2 years to make this successful.
Thanks, Joe. This is probably a good time to ask if somebody's listening and wants to sign a petition right now, how do they do that?
Go to FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. You will have to print it out, sign it, and mail it. The state does not accept electronic signatures, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Joe. So you heard it there. Go to the website, print it out, mail it in. And I know Friends of the Everglades is going to be happy to serve as another petition gathering location. We did that for the 2024 effort. We are happy to do it again, Vote Water as well. So check out the list of supporter organizations if you're more comfortable going in, picking up a physical petition and having someone mail it for you. All right, so let's turn to a very pressing water issue right now that I think will connect with the broader issue at hand. You can see in the image behind us some algae-streaked water. This is actually an aerial picture of Lake Okeechobee from back in 2018, where we had just horrific toxic algae blooms on the lake that were discharged west to the Caloosahatchee, east to the St. Lucie, and also the Lake Worth Lagoon. This is one of our major concerns year after year, and it has been a concern this year. We've had high lake levels, and that resulted in damaging discharges both to the Caloosahatchee and east to the St. Lucie and Lake Worth Lagoon. We got a bit of a reprieve recently, so we are not receiving harmful discharges right now. I know the Caloosahatchee is still receiving some flows, and that addresses some salinity needs and stagnant conditions. We can talk about what level of flows are needed. But I just wanted to ask you, Matt, first to talk a little bit about how this initiative, the Florida Right to Clean Water, could help us with Lake Okeechobee discharges. It's the biggest single source of pollution into the estuaries, and for Sanibel Captiva, that's such a huge issue.
Yeah, I think without even diving into the really technical details of lake releases and where water's going at any given time, really the situation would be significantly better and leave us in a much better position if all we were really worrying about with these lake releases was the salinity gradient of the estuary. If that nutrient pollution wasn't inherent in the lake water, if it wasn't a massive risk of transporting an active blue-green algae bloom into our estuary or feeding a potential red tide once it gets to our estuary with all the nitrogen and phosphorus that's inherent in that lake water, we would be in a much better position. And the conversation around lake releases would look very different from it than it does today. We know from research from our marine lab that those releases can feed directly into large algae blooms out in the Gulf of Mexico, exacerbating those red tides. And all of this has these knock-on impacts environmentally, but also economically to our area. So we recently at SCCF, with partners at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida and Captains for Clean Water, finished an economic study that really dove into the impact of some of these harmful algal blooms and clean water impacts on our areas. Captain Cody volunteered a lot of his time for that study and helped us out with it as well. And the findings of it were really shocking. It was kind of this open secret that we all know that we need clean water. We need clean water for our economies and our environments and for our quality of life in Southwest Florida. But when we actually got the numbers in hand and showed that one harmful algal bloom effect can affect our coastal communities, and this is just a narrow strip of Collier, Lee, and Charlotte County in the coastal area, to the tune of over $5 billion of economic impact, and potentially cost this area 43,000 jobs. Those numbers are really staggering. So if we were in a situation where we weren't dealing with nutrient pollution, we weren't at risk of those algae blooms from these lake releases, we would feel much more comfortable where we're coming from in those conversations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll turn to Captain Cody to chime in on that, and also give us a little update of what conditions are looking like in the Caloosahatchee right now. I think it's helpful to connect this to on the ground situations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Eve. So, the conditions that we're seeing now, we are seeing the salinity return to the upper portions of the tidal basin in the Caloosahatchee River, which is a good thing right now. But we are still seeing algae activity that's coming from S77 down. So that's always going to be, a potential health risk for us. So it's something that we are consistently analyzing and mapping to see what's happening with the algae, how the winds are affecting that, and the areas that algae is starting to concentrate as it makes its way down to the lower portions of the Caloosahatchee River. Just to jump off of what Matt, was talking about with an economic study, a huge concern for us here at Calusa Waterkeeper is to continuously look at the potential health risk that is associated with cyanotoxins. I think that there would be an immense amount of help with the right to clean water if it was amended, to try to get some accountability in a state that doesn't have a threshold for potential cyanotoxin harmful levels. So it's something that, we would all benefit from and trying to adapt to this new phase that we find ourselves in with climate change, unpredictable weather that's here now. We have exponential amounts of urban development. So all of these factors are constantly cashing in, and it's, we are almost in a deficit in trying to catch up to mitigate this and manage, for the entire coastal community moving forward.
It bears repeating. We've hit on it already, but this is not just an environmental issue. And I hate to even say just, but it is also a public health issue. We know that cyanobacteria, harmful algal blooms, are linked to really concerning conditions, as Cody just mentioned. Neurodegenerative diseases, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's have been linked to these blooms. Liver disease also. Here in the Stewart area, at least one dog has died after ingesting microcystin from blue-green algae, and others have been sickened. So this is not to be messed with. And there's also data that shows that these toxins can be aerosolized up to a mile or so. So, even if you're not directly on the water, you can be impacted by poor water quality and our state policymakers' failure to do something about it. So thanks for chiming in on that. This is a good segue to Gil. Gil, you've done some digging into the state's basin management action plans, which are supposed to address water pollution, but really have not done so. Tell us a little bit about why those haven't gotten the job done.
Well, in large part, it's because there's been no accountability. Basin management action plans, or I call it sort of the state's marquee attempt at pollution reduction. According to the Federal Clean Water Act, where a water body has been determined to be impaired, the state must develop what's called a TMDL, total maximum daily load. They call it it's basically the amount of new nutrients and pollution that a water body can absorb without exceeding, water quality limits. And so to achieve the TMDLs, the state of Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection comes up with these BMAPs, these basin management action plans. And what it is supposed to be this detailed plan as to how we're going to reduce pollution in these water bodies. And it involves best management practices for agricultural producers. It involves all sorts of clean water projects, other efforts by any polluters in these basins to actually reduce their pollution. But study, there've been news articles, there've been studies. They don't work. They're not working, and in a lot of cases, they're designed not to work. Our friends at the Florida Springs Council up in northern Florida have been fighting DEP on this issue for quite some time. They have said that the DEP chose not to include specific stuff in the BMAPs there. And there's a quote I want to read to you. This is a Craig Pittman column in the Florida Phoenix last year. And this talks about how, quote, the problem clearly was that the DEP could not write or enforce effective BMAPs due to political pressure from the highest levels in Florida's government. This is Bob Knight, director of the Howard T. Odom Florida Springs Institute, saying this. He says, science was not the roadblock. Politics was and still is. And so that's it in a nutshell right there. We know just from some of the research that we've done in the Lake Okeechobee Basin, for example, agriculture is by far, and when I say by far, I mean by far, the biggest source of pollution. In some sub-basins, they're responsible for up to 90% of total phosphorus and 90% of total nitrogen going into the water. Agriculture is an extremely powerful special interest in the state of Florida. So, we do have these BMPs, these best management practices that producers are supposed to adopt, and most have. Most legitimate producers in these basins have adopted these practices, but we're still not hitting pollution reduction targets. And where that's been the case, there have been no consequences for the state agency, let alone the polluters, whatsoever. I recently sat through a presentation on the St. Lucie Basin Management Action Plan, a yearly review, and it clearly showed that the BMAP plan is not going to hit the milestones for total phosphorus and total nitrogen reductions. We're not going to hit the milestone. We're going to miss the target. So what happens when we miss the target? Nothing. We kick the can down the road. And I want to pull up here, Cody, maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, but Cody, Calusa Waterkeeper actually had a Facebook update on Caloosahatchee BMAP. And Cody, I'll hand it to you just real quickly, but I'm saying the annual report should outrage people just as much as any discharge photos. There's a chart that shows the total nitrogen loading has been more than 2 times the BMAP's original estimates. Mm-hmm. Can you let me just punt that to you to talk a little bit more about that. But that's an example of how these things are almost set up to fail.
Yes. And so it's important to note, that those figures are actually coming from DEP themselves on the Caloosahatchee BMAP annual review. I don't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but, that modeling is showing just how much of a deficit we are in the actual nitrogen reduction, in this current phase that we find ourselves in 2024. And something that's extremely, scary about this is that when we start to question DEP, if we can't meet that end goal at that date, they are talking about continuously extending the time frame in which those BMAPs could be achieved. So just as you stated, this is a kicking the can down the road. An additional comment here that I found quite interesting during the Caloosahatchee BMAP overview, coming from FDACS, that we find that when we press them, at least on the western aspect of this, that there is 100% of enrollment in BMPs, there is no one that's actually doing the water testing for the sites to make sure that they are actually fulfilling the requirements of clean water. So we are definitely not holding our breath on this, but it's something that FDACS has stated that they will be updating a lot of their workbooks as well as the BMP practices. So that's something that we're going to continuously look into. But the big picture is that, we have a nutrient problem and it's not going away. I wish that we could, solicit some more engagement from the public, just to, try to hold these people accountable that we are really in a bad place right now as far as nitrogen is going.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. So that's it. There's no accountability. We're missing the targets. We're underestimating the targets probably. We're assuming that these best management practices are actually delivering the pollution reductions that they're quote unquote supposed to, but in a lot of cases we're not actually measuring. The BMAP programs, they're not working. And again, I think a lot of that starts with the fact that there's no accountability.
Yeah. Thanks, Gil. And for just the casual observer who's listening to this, let's make it very clear. These excess nitrogen loads are fuel for toxic algae blooms, like the one you see in the image behind us. That's what this quote unquote nutrient pollution causes. And phosphorus has been an incredible problem in the Everglades, leading to monocultures of cattails that totally disrupt the system. So there's a lot of unmitigated pollution in Florida. So thank you guys for diving into that. All right, let's keep moving along here. Joe, this isn't just a Florida idea or initiative. The rights of nature effort, if you will, or right to clean water, has been talked about in other states and even around the world. Tell us where these ideas have gained some traction elsewhere.
Okay, regarding rights of nature internationally, there are a number of nations that have incorporated rights of nature even into their constitutions. Within the United States, it's mostly happening at government levels, local government levels, and also among some of our indigenous tribes. When we're talking about amending state constitutions, giving citizens rights to clean air, clean water, well, this is a burgeoning movement. There are about 20 states in the nation that are pursuing amendments, kind of like ours. There are 2 that have had them in their amendments since the early 1970s. That would be Pennsylvania and Montana. Montana, I would just talk a moment about. I hope that everybody listening knows that last summer, there was a very historic youth climate case. Those folks took their state government to court over a piece of legislation that was very pro-fossil fuel. And these young people said, well, that goes against our constitutional rights, because in Montana, all citizens have a right to a healthy environment. They made the case that fossil fuel friendly law was a violation of that right, and the court agreed. There have been other youth climate cases. None of them has been successful. This one was, because it was based on constitutional environmental right. So many states are pursuing this. One key difference here in Florida, as far as I know, we are the only one that is pursuing this through a citizens initiative. The other states, they're going through their legislatures. We do not want to hold our breath here in Florida for our legislature to go down this path. Not going to happen. So that's why we're spending the next 2 years getting the 900,000 signed petitions.
Yes, I would not trust our state legislature to advance this successfully. So that's exactly why we're taking it into our own hands. And there are a lot of details in our discussion here, but I hope those of you listening feel excited about this concept. Florida has been a leader in decades past in things like growth management, for example. And unfortunately, in recent years, we have really gone backwards in terms of environmental protections. This is a chance for us to be a leader again. We're a peninsula state. We're surrounded by water. We have incredible natural resources. Let's step up and show the rest of the country that this can be done here. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about an important U.S. Supreme Court decision from last year that makes this all the more urgent. Last year, there was a ruling in the Sackett case that completely diminished the number of wetlands in the United States that are protected under the Clean Water Act. That is really concerning here in Florida, which is basically swampland, a lot of the land that Florida was developed on, and a lot of our remaining green spaces are wetlands. So some local communities, like in Martin County, where I live, still have very rigorous local wetlands protections. And in fact, the state of Florida itself has a pretty robust wetlands permitting program. Other states that don't have those in place are in really bad shape following the Supreme Court ruling. And we've seen states like North Carolina unravel wetlands protections laws. So the concern now is that following this gutting of Clean Water Act protections, that the state may roll back its protections, and we need a backstop. And this amendment can provide that. So just wanted to make sure we talk about the Sackett ruling briefly. We don't have to get too deep into it, but there's a lot at stake right now. All right. I'm going to open a question up to the group, and then in a few minutes here, we're going to go to some audience questions. People have concerns about amending our Constitution in any manner. What are some of the common concerns you're hearing about this, and how do you respond to them? So, Joe, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. A common concern we hear is that the amendment is going to lead to an onslaught or proliferation of lawsuits. We're confident that is not going to happen. We know that because in Montana and Pennsylvania, that has not happened over decades. What we see is there are 3, 4, maybe 5 lawsuits per year under these environmental amendments. Furthermore, lawsuits are very, very expensive, and people aren't going to undertake them flippantly. Last thing, and it relates to something that Gil said earlier, after a while, after the state loses a few of these lawsuits, they are going to stop pursuing harmful policies. This is going to bring some systemic change. They're going to be making good, healthy decisions based on science as we go forward, not based on political influence. There'll be less of a need for lawsuits. So that is an unwarranted concern.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else want to chime in with concerns you're hearing and how you might respond to them?
I'll take one. This is an unfortunate one, but I do hear it quite often. And that's more so along the lines, is this an assimilation or affiliation with a certain political party? And that's one, that I take the chance to talk with everyone that does ask the question. The Right to Clean Water Amendment transcends all of those demographics. It is for everyone. This does not need to be assimilated with one political party or another, because it's not. This is a fundamental right for everyone. And so obviously, since we do live in a polarizing section of the state, politics do come up on a frequent basis. But I do challenge people, when they do ask that, to provide them with the details to make that decision for themselves. And again, to help promote, the right to clean water.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Really important to underscore that this is nonpartisan and not connected with any party.
I think there's another important distinction that also needs to be made, and sometimes people get lost in the weeds a little bit, about the difference between rights to nature and rights of nature. In my talking with people about this petition, things come up like the tree that owns itself, or a lake being able to sue people over pollution in it. And that's not what this is. It's really important to understand that this really just gives a cause to action for rights that theoretically we already have. There's already laws that are supposed to be enacted to protect our waters. But right now, as Joe said, we don't have a way to enact those at all. So this isn't really even doing anything radical, except holding accountable the people that should be protecting our water anyway.
Very important point. Yes, there are efforts in other states I've read about to give specific bodies of water a right to standing in court. That's not what's being done here. This is very practical and not anything anyone should be scared of. All right, we can keep moving along here. I have just a couple more questions. Cody, you have worked as a fishing guide, as I mentioned. What are you hearing from other guides and commercial fishermen in particular?
Well, I think that there is some apprehension that does come from the commercial sector, and rightfully so. A lot of these folks are continuing cultural traditions for multiple generations, and they've usually been at the short end of the stick when it comes to the progress inside of the state with development, just over time, and then a decline in the amount of natural resources that are still available. Once we actually have the opportunity to discuss this with these people, let them know what this could mean and how we can, instill some more protections on the things that they count on a day in and day out basis, then we do see camaraderie. We do see them start to support it. And that's especially happening towards like the professional fishing guides. Being a guide, we are in the service industry, but we have a unique opportunity because we do spend so much time with an immense amount of people from all over the place. That really emphasizes the importance of us being good stewards. We get to share a natural resource with people in a fun, enjoying manner out on the water. So those that I've been able to have the discussion with, I think really see the benefit in this. And, we're hoping that slowly but surely we'll start to get some others to convert once, more of us are on board with this. But I do, emphasize that there is the apprehension that's coming from a lot of these folks, and it's rightfully so. We just need to work a little bit harder in order to educate them and encourage them, that this is one of the best shots that we have to really get some sincere protections over the things that we love and what we count on a day in and day out basis.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks for having those conversations. Joe, do you want to just take about 30 seconds to mention some of the other supporters before we turn to audience questions?
Sure. We've got very, very many of them. League of Women Voters, most of the Waterkeeper chapters, Florida Springs Council, which was mentioned earlier, Vote Water, of course, Citizens Climate Lobby, Florida Wildlife Foundation, Florida Sportsman Magazine, Coastal Angler. I would also mention faith communities. I mean, again, the amendment appeals to broad spectrums of our society.
Thanks, Joe. That's helpful. Okay, we can turn to some questions from the audience. I've noticed we've received quite a few comments, lots of interest in this topic. We can queue up the first one. Okay, John Heim. How will the rights to nature and the right to clean water movement help the Caloosahatchee River? It travels through several counties. So how do we plan to get petitions via several counties the river runs through to protect it? So a couple of components to that question there. Let's start with the second one. What's the kind of the tactic for getting petitions from the region? I'll open that up to the group.
Well, let me jump in with something that I raised on the advisory board call the other night. And I think this is going to be true sort of across the board, which is how do you reach people who might not normally be tuned into this issue? Because you're going to need them to get the 900,000 signatures in the first place. Everybody who pays attention to clean water issues probably knows something about this. But, for this to be successful, the reach needs to be a whole lot longer than that. So, and maybe especially in some of these counties that, are maybe a little bit more interior in the state and maybe don't have or don't perceive themselves to have as acute problems as maybe a Lee County does or maybe a Martin County does, that sort of thing.
Well, I'll also say that we've got, county teams in many of the counties throughout the state and certainly down here along the Caloosahatchee. I certainly will not be surprised if our current concerns increase people's awareness. It certainly did back in 2018, 2019. It's going to be hard not to be concerned about this. And our ambassadors will be out there this weekend, Earth Day. We're going to have a high profile. So how can it help? Well, our amendment can address many of the Caloosahatchee water quality issues. Ultimately, it'll provide a solution that we haven't been able to get so far, which is to curtail the pollution at the source instead of just trying to clean it up afterwards with billion-dollar projects and such.
That's right. And anything else, Matt or Cody?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, how can it help the river? The majority of, the population in Southwest Florida is along the Caloosahatchee River or the coastal communities that are here. So being able to start addressing some of those health concerns to a further degree, obviously will have an immense amount of impacts, not only on water quality improvements in the river, but the overall quality of life for the communities that call it home. And I see that there is a question at the end of that as well. So how do we plan to get petitions via several counties? that the river runs through it. I think that we address that. There are an immense amount of tabling opportunities. I know that a lot of these volunteers, we are doing environmental events, gardening. I mean, you name it. There are a lot of boots on the ground interacting with the community, and the word of mouth is usually the best way to try to get that done, as well as the social media presence, and continuously having these types of conversations really does go a long ways.
Thanks, Cody.
If I just jump in for 20 seconds here, our Lee County volunteers have already collected the thousands of dollars necessary to do a direct mail campaign. Every citizen who signed the previous amendment has gotten 3 petitions in the mail over the last week or so.
Mm-hmm. Great. So they sign it and they mail it back in, right?
Mail it back in, yep.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, we'll take the next question. All right. Jill asks, has there been consultation with the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes as to what actions they would like to see taken? I think this is a really good question, Joe. I think it was you that alluded to some of the rights of nature concepts that are in tribal constitutions. So I'll kick this one to you as the leader of this initiative. Have you consulted officially with the tribes on this?
Not very much, to be quite honest. We have made outreach, but we are not working very closely with them. We welcome their input, their advice, their help, but so far we haven't gotten, not much is happening there at this point.
Sounds like a great opportunity. I know that Friends of the Everglades has stood in court on clean water issues with the Miccosukee tribe, and there's a really deep connection to nature in our state. So thanks for asking that, Jill. More to come. We'll take the next question. Anne asks, is there a clean water advocate in each of the 67 counties managing petition gathering? Joe?
No. There is not.
Is that a goal?
Yes. There are definitely some areas in the state where we have great representation, and there are some areas that we need to beef it up.
And this is a question I should know the answer to, but I don't. So you have the 900,000 petition requirement. Is there also a requirement that they come from specific geographic areas?
Yes. Well, they have to come from a certain percentage of our congressional districts, and you need to reach a certain number of people within each of those congressional districts.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. We'll take the next question. Cheryl asks, how do we get more of the commercial fishermen engaged faster? Cody, you want to take a pass at that one?
Quite honestly, it's genuine communications. Most of the commercial fishermen here are, very noble. They're not so open to outsiders, so to speak. So to continuously trying to educate and lead by example, I think is the best way to continue this forward.
Yeah, I think that could be said for a lot of the communities and demographics that will want to enlist support from those one-on-one conversations when you can have them. That building of trust just goes so far. It's great we're having this conversation today, and so grateful for the audience that's tuned in, but one-on-one is really important. Okay, we can take another question. JT Turner asks, Eve, what should Floridians expect to see regarding the promotion of the petition effort? And is there any estimate on how much it will cost to gather the needed petitions? So, I mean, I'll just say that Friends of the Everglades plans to keep this in the spotlight to the extent we can. I think it's much broader than us. So I'll turn that question over to Joe in terms of the cost.
Well, like I said, we're not going to go down the route of paid petition gatherers. We're going to go with targeted mail campaigns. We expect overall, this is going to run us somewhere around $6-7 million, maybe $8 million.
Which is a lot of money, but a fraction of what some of the amendments that have gotten on the ballot have spent to get there. So that's, again, when the state legislature raised the bar in terms of another number of petitions, almost 1 million petitions. That's what almost 1 in 22 people has to sign this petition to get it on the ballot. And as a result, it costs a lot of money to get it there. Personally, I wish that had not changed. It should be easier for citizens to vote on their own constitution.
It's worth noting that a few years back, we had 4 years to gather the required number of petitions. Legislature knocked that down to 2 years.
Okay, so the number increased and the time frame for gathering them decreased. Gotcha. Okay, we can take some more questions if we have more. We do. Bruce asks, are there any Florida legislators or applicable committee chairs that are on board with our efforts? We need a legislative champion. That's a really good question. Who's behind this in Tallahassee?
We haven't had very many supporters among the legislators. Perhaps that's not too surprising. After all, as we noted, the purpose of our amendment is to go ahead above the heads of the legislature.
Is there any hope for any of them?
Yes, I think there are. As the political season gets underway, we're actually going to ask that they get on record and saying whether or not they support the amendment. So we'll have a very specific answer to this question over the next few months.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's potentially something, our organizations can help with. It's a simple yes or no question. Do you support this? And if the answer is no, then why?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we can take another question. Carl asks, how will the right to clean water be effective in regards to the constitutionally created authority of the FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission? I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone?
Well, our amendment creates a fundamental right. As I stated earlier, this is the highest level of rights there are. Do actions from any state agency end up harming our waters and therefore violating our rights? Well, then our amendment would come into play.
Yeah, this raises some interesting questions too about non-state agencies. So the Army Corps of Engineers, for instance, plays a role in at least transmitting harmful water into our estuaries from Lake Okeechobee, for example. So how could this state amendment impact a federal agency's actions? Have you thought about that?
Yes. So in regard to the Army Corps of Engineers, a lot of what they do is through agreements with the state executive branch. And so that's why we can still go after the DEP and other pertinent state agencies in regard to Lake Okeechobee. After all, it's our state agencies that are responsible for the quality of the water that is in Lake Okeechobee. But specifically, the focus of the amendment is very narrow. It doesn't allow us to go after corporations. It doesn't allow us to go after the legislature. It's the executive branch of government. That's due to Florida law.
Right. Thanks. And in the case of Lake Okeechobee discharges in the Army Corps of Engineers, yes, the Army Corps controls the floodgates east and west, but the South Florida Water Management District, which is a state agency, controls the floodgates south and plays a big role in recommending flows east and west and providing capacity to the south. That's really important. Okay, we can take another question. Okay, Mary asks, how can we make this presentation made seen by many other folks that need to see it? My guess is many watching this now are already part of the movement. How can we get others to get concerned? I'll answer briefly, and then I don't know, Gil, maybe you'd like to chime in. We certainly will be sharing this and promoting this on replay, and actually most of the video views we get for conversations like this come on replay. So this will remain a resource, and I encourage you, Mary, and your friends to share it. Gil, what do you think about spreading awareness? That's something Boat Water is very good at.
Well, I think again, I said this a couple of minutes ago, you need to this movement needs to sort of reach beyond the typical, clean water supporters to impact those and to get those interested and I think there's a case to be made to people maybe who don't follow these issues as closely or don't perceive, that this really has a lot to do with them, because I think it does. When you talk about the impact of clean water on a region's economy, I mean, that is going to impact everyone who lives in that region. So those who might not have thought too much of it. So it's a matter of getting this in front of those people. And I think, as Cody said a little bit ago, where there's tabling opportunities at community events, when there's opportunities to speak to community organizations, maybe some that don't necessarily have a lot to do with the clean water movement, maybe homeowners associations, that type of thing. I think, there are opportunities to get this in front of people who might not otherwise see it. Social media, again, if everybody shares it, it's going to spread just a lot farther than if just a few people do, that sort of thing. So I think that's sort of the key to this, is just getting this in front of people who might not otherwise see it, and making a case to them why this is important to them and their community and their entire region, and frankly, the entire state of Florida. I think the arguments can resonate as long as they're finding targets. So.
Thanks, Gil.
And the only thing I would add to that is that the Right to Clean Water has done something, as simple as having yard signs. I've had at least a dozen interactions with people throughout my neighborhood just from displaying the signs in my yard. People are curious creatures and they do ask questions. So the more that you're repping this yourself and putting it in places that other people see, the higher likelihood that they're going to start asking questions, and you can continue the solicitation in that manner. So just wanted to plug that real quick because, as I've said, those signs do go a long ways and were very helpful.
Thanks, Cody, and thanks, Gil. I want to give Joe and Matt an opportunity to offer any closing thoughts as we've hit the 1 hour mark here. Matt, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, I think even going back to that last question, I think that it's really important just to get educated advocates out there talking about this issue. This is an issue that makes sense when you think about it. When people start engaging with the issue, you're really hard pressed to find people who aren't on the side of clean water, especially in Florida, especially where water permeates every capacity and facet of our lives. It's so important that we have clean water, whether it's for drinking, for recreating, for working. It drives our entire state forward. So when people start to understand this issue and start to hear that there's potentially a solution, it's really difficult to come down on the other side of this issue. And I think if you do find someone who, for some reason, isn't in favor of this amendment, even though you've gone through the issues, you can also remind them that this is just to get it on the ballot. By signing this petition, all you're doing is leaving this decision up to Florida voters. So this is really the first step in a long process that hopefully will give us the tools we need to protect our own state.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Closing words from you, Joe?
Yes, ultimately, this is a numbers game. So very, very practical. Everybody sign the petition, go get another 3 to 5 people to sign, put it in an envelope, mail it to our Fort Myers address. That's the way this is going to happen, at least in a very big way.
Thanks, Joe. When you spell it out like that, it sounds very achievable. And I hope that our conversation today helped illuminate for our audience and for others who will watch this in the future why this amendment is so important and can really make a difference in terms of what's honestly a water crisis on multiple fronts in Florida. So thank you all, Joe, Gil, Matt, and Cody, for being here today. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. This conversation will be ongoing, and let's hope we have some success in 2026.
Thank you, Eve.
Thanks.
you.
Thanks, everyone.